I know you've looked back on it many times, but on this 40-year milestone, how do you sum up that moment?
I don't know. See, the one really nice thing this year was the recent trip we had to Russia, and we were in Moscow and St. Petersburg and Yaroslavl. And when you go back, you're never quite sure what you're going to find. And we had a great time. And I'm not quite sure why it worked so well, but I think in part it was that there were ceremonies that involved players from both teams. There was a group from the 1987 Canada Cup. Gretzky, Messier were there. There were a couple of games, and the whole thing. All of a sudden, you could sort of look around at people's faces and faces that have a lot of living that has gone on in those faces, and you tend to just come to appreciate that time 40 years ago.
Does it seem odd to celebrate it in Moscow, in Russia? Like, they lost the series. Obviously, it's huge here.
Yeah.
What's the sense in Russia?
Well, that's the interesting part, and you would think that it would be not so special a memory there, but that's not the way it is. And I think what it is, and I was saying this to somebody yesterday, I think what it is that both of us won what we had to win. We had to win the series. We would have liked to have won more games, 8 in a row, won by big scores and all the rest of it, but we didn't, but we won what we had to win. What they had to win was to show that hockey could be played a different way at the highest level, and they did that. They would have loved to have won the series, but they won that part of it, and I think that's why both of us have such fond memories of it.
Paul's goal to win the series, you had a unique view of it. What's your memory of that moment?
I have no recollection except I remember the sort of the celebration of it. I mean, I remember just sort of sprinting down the sprinting, as much as I can sprint, and clomping down the ice, and then I can remember myself in sort of that pile of celebration, and then thinking, I got to get a hold of myself. There's still 34 seconds to go. I've got to get a grip, and that's all I really remember of that.
And given the amount of intensity that this exhibition series was supposed to be an exhibition, but it turned into something much more than that. Is there a sense of relief when it was over?
Oh, that's what it was when it was over. I mean, I think that there was very little kind of celebration at that moment, and it was much more that feeling of deep relief, that we had gone from about as low a low as any of us had ever experienced in hockey, and then to the highest high, and all part of the same thing. And so it was. I remember in the dressing room, I'm sure that there was a lot of yelling in this for a few minutes, but then very quickly after that, I think it was people just sort of sitting in their place and then taking a deep breath and then having a little nice smile come over their faces.
Is there a bond with this group more than any kind of Stanley Cup team?
No, I mean, I think that there is and I think there's just sort of, those are just kind of unfair comparisons. I mean, I think it's quite deep with both, and for the same reasons, that you've gone through something together, that you set out towards something, and you had ups and downs in the getting there, and then you did finally get there, and so you share something. I mean, I think that my guess is that for almost every player on this team, even if we would have played more significant roles on our own club teams than on this team, and we may have won championships on our club teams, I think for virtually everybody, this is our favorite hockey memory, and you can't dictate that. I mean, you can't say this is what I want to be my favorite memory, or I want something else to be. It's just how you feel, and after all those years, that's what it feels like.
What's it like to get together with these guys?
Oh, it's fun. I mean, it's interesting. It was really good that trip that we just had. There were about 11 players or so, and so you just get a little bit more time to talk about a few things rather than you start with the obvious stuff, and then there might even be enough time to go to the not obvious stuff. and then that's kind of nice.
How many cuts did you win?
I'm sorry?
How many cuts did you win?
6.
And for me personally, I wasn't born when this series happened yet.
Right.
I feel like I remember this like it was yesterday.
right.
Do you get that a lot? Like this is
Yeah.
more than just a hockey series. This is Canadian culture, Canadian history.
Well, that's how it's turned out. I mean, you never. Again, those are things you can't predict. You don't know what's going to survive and what isn't going to survive, and in what way it's going to survive. I think it is, and I think it's fairly part of Canadian history. I mean, it came at a particular time, and it was the time of the Cold War, but it was also a time when Canadians didn't travel a lot to Europe, and they certainly didn't travel to the Soviet Union. And here you had, for this series, you had 3,000 Canadians who traveled, for this series, and were there at those games, and experiencing something that they didn't imagine, not only on the ice but off the ice, as well. And I think that that part of the significance of the whole thing is that having the terrible down part of it, and I think maybe our greatest achievement is that we hung in, and that what started as a disaster didn't end as a disaster, and that we demonstrated something that, and I think that it's very much the spirit of Canadian hockey, of where there's always a way, and Europeans would always talk about that, about Canadian players. You can never be sure a game is over until it's over. I mean that Canadian players will come from behind somehow, and it's almost a legendary kind of feature that is talked about, in Europe, and I think that there's something to that, and that certainly was exemplified in this series.